Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Weekly Pitch. I'm Matt Price, coming to you from Rockland County, New York. Well, last show, I did say that we were going to talk about the Washington football team and how there were conversations about their name getting changed and the Cleveland Indians changing their team name. However, there was big news that broke out yesterday involving the Miami Marlins baseball team, and it was such a serious topic that went around not just the baseball world, but the sports world. We felt we here at the Weekly Pitch had to talk about it. It's very important, especially with baseball season finally underway. So with that, let's get right to it. I want to welcome in my panel for tonight. We've got Sierra Keat, and back for a second straight show is the ultimate Mets fan, Jackson Roberts. How are you both doing?
I'm doing well. I'm staying safe up here in Vermont. Jackson, how are you? I haven't seen you in a long time.
Yeah, it's nice to see you, Sierra. And Matt, thanks for having me back again. Trying to do what we can to stay safe. And, thankfully we are all fortunate to be in a situation where we don't have to be on the run every 2 seconds, where we have to be traveling like it seems a lot of these MLB teams unfortunately do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. All right, so let's dive right into this. So before Sunday's game, which was the final game of a 3-game set between the Miami Marlins and the Philadelphia Phillies, it took place in Philadelphia, obviously, and there was news that broke that 4 main Marlins players, including Jose Urena, who was supposed to start that game on Sunday, had tested positive. But it didn't end there, ladies and gentlemen. It did not end there, because immediately following day, there were more tests that came back positive from the Miami Marlins. 8 players and 3 coaches. So if you do the math, well, actually 2 coaches. So when you put the math together, 10 cases, and then the 4 the previous day, 14 cases. 14. On the Miami Marlins alone. That is a major outbreak. I know it's not really like a cluster, but that's like a small cluster itself. I could not believe that had happened. I'm still personally trying to figure out how in the world does that happen within a short period of time. 40% of the Marlins roster is COVID positive. That is terrible. Sierra, what are your thoughts on this?
First of all, my thoughts are, it shows the severity of this virus. One, this virus is no joke, and it spreads quickly, as we've seen in the previous months. And while I know fans were thrilled to have baseball back, we've now seen that even in just a matter of days, bringing baseball back maybe wasn't the best or safest idea for players and staff.
So now, Jackson, I want to go to you. First of all, 2 things for you. One, give us your take on the situation that developed yesterday, and on how the Marlins are possibly going to move forward from this. Because when it comes to a 60-game sprint and you already have 2 games postponed, they canceled last night's game against Baltimore. They're canceling tonight's game again. Well, not canceling. They're postponing the games as of right now. We don't know when they're going to make them up or if they're going to make them up. So just give us your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate situation. I think to the point Sierra made, how does something like this happen? These players go home to their families all the time. Their families might be out. Their kids might be out. Could easily, make its way to one of the players. And then, before everybody's had the chance to test positive, others have contracted it. I think that if you're the Marlins, how you move forward is you got to get everybody healthy again. Either that or you're going to have to – actually, I don't even know that calling guys up would work because, they got to travel. There are concerns there. I think that there were guys on the ESPN telecast of tonight's Met game who had mentioned this, I think it was Eduardo Perez, and it's a fair point. Not all teams might play the same amount of games because of this. The Yankees, as we know, and as you mentioned, Matt, were supposed to play the Phillies, but they're postponed. Marlins game was postponed too. I don't know that you necessarily can make all of these games up, especially if you're the Marlins. You have that many players test positive. I don't know that you have enough to put a team on the field. And if that's the case, you're going to have to take – I would say you're going to have to take at least a couple games off. So it's a very unfair situation, but, like everything else, there are more questions than answers. And it's been one odd, strange year and very, in a way, unfortunate because it's just unlike anything we've ever seen, at least in our lifetime, that is. So, how do you come back from this? You just got to get everybody fully healthy. That's where you start.
That is where you start. And to Jackson's point, for those who were unaware, the Yankees-Phillies game was postponed as well because that was the opponent, the Phillies, who Miami played previously this past weekend. So now I want to get into first of all, how this could have possibly happened. Obviously, there were rumors going around on Twitter. Did Miami get this? Did this happen while the Marlins were in Atlanta playing those 2 exhibition games against the Braves? Did someone contract the virus, whether it was player, coach, or even personnel, who contracted while Miami was doing some final practices while in Florida? Did someone in Philadelphia contracted and it spread to everyone else? We just don't know. It's a very crazy situation. There was also rumor of just, well, actually, I actually just said that rumor where, and I'm not trying to spread rumors, but that someone on the Miami staff might have contracted it while he or she was in Florida. Sierra, give us your thoughts on how this might have happened and how MLB should take extreme measures to make sure this does not happen again.
Well, like I said, this virus is very contagious. And while most people are being careful, like you said, Miami is currently the epicenter in the U.S. and frankly in the world for this virus. And while people are taking an abundance of caution in the MLB, it's frankly people outside of the MLB who aren't taking safety precautions seriously that pose a real threat to everyone else. So it's hard to tell where the virus could have come from. It could have been from a surface. It could have been even from a gas handle at a gas station. Like, there's just really no way to tell. But going forward, the best thing the MLB can do is make sure players are self-quarantining, especially for those on the Miami team and on the Braves or the Phillies, because they've clearly been exposed at this point, to the point that I don't feel that if they were to play other teams, they wouldn't be able to do so safely. Oftentimes, people are not symptomatic with the virus until up to 2 weeks after being in contact. So that also makes it very difficult to determine where they got the virus from. So going forward, it's really difficult to say what the MLB can do to impose safety measures on players. You can tell everybody wear a mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, but when players and staff go outside of that bubble, what happens then?
I want to, you mentioned all like the protocols and all that, Sierra, just now. And Jackson, I want to bring up a tweet that our good friend at 1010 Wins, Mark Ernay, put out earlier today. He retweeted this with comment. This from Jacob Resnick, who covers the Mets and their minor league affiliates. And he put out a quote from the New York Mets' Brandon Nimmo in response to the Marlins situation on if he would consider wearing a mask and being more hesitant when it comes to high-fiving the players in the dugout. So this is what he said. I want to get your response. Actually, for me, I think the mask does more harm than good. While we're inside, I definitely want to take my precautions. I've got gloves on when I'm hitting, so when I high-five someone, I've got gloves on or they've got gloves on. We're around each other quite a bit, but we're keeping that 6 feet distance. If it happened to spread that way, I guess then so be it. No, it doesn't make me more cautious. I still want to go out there and have fun, try and make this as normal as possible. I honestly think that we're taking a lot of the precautions that you need to take, and I just don't see where having a high five or wearing a mask during the game would stop that from happening. So, Jackson, 14 Marlins cases within a 48-hour span. You got Brandon Nimmo, who's earned a lot of respect from Major League Baseball. He's known right now as one of the happiest guys in the majors right now. And he says that after one of the MLB's teams had a major outbreak. One team had a major outbreak, and he says that to wearing masks. What is your thought? I mean, this is one of our teams. This is one of your players on one of your favorite teams. Like, what goes through your mind when you hear one of your players say that?
I'm not going to turn him into the enemy, and I certainly don't want to make this political, and I certainly don't want to try to, make myself sound like a medical expert, but I've listened to them, and they've said wearing a mask helps, and they've said social distancing helps. Now, obviously, you can't always social distance during a baseball game.
Right.
And I understand the point he is making about not having to wear a mask every second you're on the field because you were outdoors. Mm-hmm. That I understand. But the notion of saying a mask does more harm than good, that's just hogwash. And we know that to be the case by now because, I really don't need to rehash this. I mean, they have a purpose and they exist for a reason. They're used by medical professionals day in and day out, pre-pandemic for a reason. So I was a little surprised to hear him say that. I don't want to cast any aspersions on him. I know he comes from a highly Catholic background. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm not sure, what he may or may not think about this or other potential viruses. I have no idea. And quite frankly, it's his prerogative to feel however he wants to feel. But right. I was a little surprised to hear him say that considering he plays in New York, which, let's face it, was a little bit of a hot spot at first. And it's died down in part because people have taken the measures that health experts recommend. I think that, I think really to kind of add on to what you were saying before about, getting back to normal and playing baseball again, I really think the MLB botched this, if you ask me. I mean, I had tweeted earlier on my personal account that, the NBA was proactive in how they took an approach. They created a bubble, which is it's a surefire way to stay safe. So much so that now they're turning it into the NBA 2K neighborhood.
Same with the WNBA. They did the exact same thing.
Right.
MLS, the NHL starting their bubbles soon, and Toronto and Edmonton.
That's right. But somehow the MLB thought it wouldn't be a bad idea to have teams traveling all across the country, left and right. And really, if there are no fans, there's no point, if you ask me, because there's no home field advantage. So I understand that it might be a little bit more difficult to find 15 baseball fields in one place than, say, 15 basketball courts. But listen, if the NHL can do it, it's not like ice rinks are more plentiful than baseball fields. If the NHL has found a way to potentially look into it and do it, the NBA is doing it very well. I think the MLB really, if you ask me, if there's one takeaway I have from all of this, they really missed a chance by not creating a bubble.
I very much agree with that. And Sierra, I can see you nodding your head up and down. You agree with that too. I want to dive into that as well. When you think about how the negotiations were going on, Rob Manfred, in my mind, had that good idea of creating that bubble. Now, I was for it, but I was also somewhat against it because there were players who had families. They didn't want to be away from their families. Take Mike Trout, for example, best player in the majors by far at the moment. His wife is expected to give birth next month, right? You just had Garrett Cole. He and his wife just a 2 or 3 weeks ago, they just welcomed their first child, and congratulations to them. But, you think about players that have health conditions. Take Red Sox pitcher Eduardo Rodriguez. He, a little while ago, had tested positive. He's fine now, but he also has a heart condition. And when you think of this outbreak, and you think about players like him and other players who could be at risk if they were to have these existing conditions or whatever, then you're really in trouble. And this is where the fans say, why couldn't we just have this bubble? Now, I get the players had their reasons. Let's take Arizona, for example. When it came to Arizona, the weather is extremely hot during the summertime. You don't want players to get hurt or God forbid, pass away from heat exhaustion. We've heard those. Yeah,
go ahead. I was going to respond to that, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Jackson. Go ahead.
No. What I was going to say is I understand that point, Matt. But first of all, these are guys in their 20s and 30s. I think unless they're extremely dehydrated, which never happens to a professional athlete nowadays because they're given all the water in the world, I don't really think that's something you have to worry about. I think the bigger issue with Arizona, not so much that it's outdoors. I mean, look, baseball's a summer game. Guys playing 100-degree weather all the time. Guys in Little League do that. I think the bigger issue was that Arizona was a little bit of a hotbed, if you remember, or a hotspot, I should say.
And
Florida. Yeah, if you remember back in March or April, I believe it was, there was a proposition that the MLB play a lot of their games there because of all the spring training sites. That's kind of where they're centralized in Florida and Arizona. But the players, as you said, you said it, no dice for them. Not interested. And I understand that notion that, you have family and you have people back home, but, I really hate to say this, but in a way it's true. I don't think the MLB should forego creating a bubble just because a few guys might not want to play. You don't have to play the season. I mean, they made it clear in negotiations that you wouldn't lose any service time. They worked out something financially, finally, after months. So I think, if you're trying to preserve the safety of the game, I don't think it's worth sacrificing just because a couple people, a small percentage, want to be away.
No, I get that. I totally get that. And just keep in mind one more thing about Arizona, Jackson, and Sierra, I know you know this too. Most of the teams who play in the Cactus League during spring training in Arizona share ballparks. Dodgers and White Sox, D-backs and the Rockies, Mariners and the Padres. I can go the Royals and the Rangers even. I can go on and on and on. So it's definitely mind-boggling how that did not happen. Sierra, do you believe that now that we've seen this cluster come out, well, I don't want to say cluster anymore, I'll say outbreak. Now that we saw this outbreak come out of one team alone, do you believe that not just the players, but the league itself, because remember, this was a two-side agreement. Manfred came up with the idea. They weren't able to come up with an agreement in the end. Do you believe the players and the league made a mistake in not creating a bubble like other professional leagues have?
I think they have. And originally, this was before the NBA and WNBA had created their bubble. I was against the idea because of the population that it would bring to cities and what it would do to their hospital spaces there. However, given that the bubble method has so far been effective, I do believe the MLB missed an opportunity in doing that. I think it would be much safer than what they are doing now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just keep in mind, I mean, look, with the pandemic going on, people want to have some sense of normalcy, and we get all that. We wanted that. As baseball fans ourselves, we're finally happy that baseball is back, even if it's just for a 60-game sprint. But, we just had to make sure that it was the safest way to do it. And from what we've seen so far, it seems these bubbles that we've seen from the NBA, WNBA, MLS, and WSL, and soon the NHL, and I meant to say Vancouver, not Edmonton, Vancouver and Toronto, they're starting their bubble soon, and so far it has paid off. These methods have paid off, and they're getting very strict on people leaving the bubble. The NBA just introduced new new rules to the whenever players leave the bubble, even if it's for a split minute or whatever. Now, there's another thing that I want to talk about, and this goes back to the Marlins. So, from what I heard, and I'm not sure if any of you two heard this, but there was a group chat between Marlins players, and within that group chat, they knew that their guys had tested positive. Jose Urena, Garrett Cooper, and a couple others. I can't remember who right off the top of my head, but those two were definitely in there. And when you hear that these players literally said, no, we're going to play the game. We're going to continue to play the game. That was mind-boggling to me, and here's why. It's one thing if you had one or two players, all right? Take the Nationals, for example, Juan Soto. All right, Juan Soto, just before opening night against the Yankees, he had a positive test. They still played the game, and there was no major outbreak that occurred from what we know coming out of the Washington Nationals. Here, when it comes to the Marlins, you had 4 players, not 1, not 2, 4 players. 4. And it's as if they said in this group chat that it's as if they wanted to be resilient. Now, of course, we have to show resiliency, but even if these tests had come back positive anyway, Sierra, don't you think this would have been a good decision, a good time where they could have said, you know what, let's not play this game? Because now, not only do they affect themselves, they also affected the Philadelphia Phillies because they were supposed to play a game last night against the Yankees, and now that game got postponed. And depending on the Phillies test, we don't know if they're going to play a game against the Yankees tonight. We just don't know.
Well, more important than that, I think their decision to play impacted the entire league as a whole.
Oh, without question.
I understand that athletes want to play and want to be resilient and power through anything. But at the same point in time, you have to put safety above everything else. Now that they've played the Phillies, I have a terrible feeling that there are going to be players on that team that are going to, as a result, get COVID. And not only that, but what's worse is even if it, like, I'm going to kind of argue what you said a little bit, even if it was just 1 or 2 players, those teams all play together. So even if you have just one person that's sick, everybody else has been in contact with that person. They're going to go out and play other teams and get in contact with them. And that's how this virus spreads.
It is how that the virus spreads. And Jackson, I want to bring you back in here for a sec because, you know, now that we've had this major cluster, I keep on saying cluster. Now that we've had, I guess you could call a major outbreak where 40% of the players on the Marlins roster have tested positive. Do you believe now is a time where the MLB puts on restrictions on how to, and not just that, also a plan to try and respond to this correctly? Because from what I've heard, the 113-page plan that they had in regards to this, they don't have a plan on how to actually respond. So what does the MLB do here to make sure that this does not happen again?
I think they got to put their heads together. I mean, they had an emergency meeting earlier today from what I saw on MLB Network, and, you know, you go from there. I think, I really think that, you know, there's more problems. Every bus that leaves for another city, every time a team travels, that's just another disaster waiting to happen, if you ask me. I mean, you know, I think the Marlins, they're the tip of the iceberg. I mean, guys, we're through one weekend and this happens. I mean, you know, who's to say this can't happen next weekend? Or who's to say we can't already get a similar type of headline tomorrow, you know, with guys that didn't even know they had it? I think if you're the MLB, I really think, you know, I have trouble saying this, but, you know, if this were to happen again, I think it might be in the best interest for everybody just to, you know, either postpone or cancel the season.
And that's hard to say that as a baseball fan. I mean,
yeah, I was trying to hold it back, but I just have to be practical here.
Right. I mean, health comes first. Health comes first. That's the bottom line. And there's one more thing that really ticked me off. And I was driving. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Sierra. Go ahead.
It's not just the health of the players that's important, but the health of everyone that's involved.
Yep.
The players, the staff, and everybody that anyone in the MLB network is going to come in contact with.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. So the other thing that really ticked me off, and I was driving around in my car just yesterday, and I heard on the Michael K. I always listen to Michael K's show. Michael K., P. Rosenberg, Don LaGreca, they all do a fantastic job. And Michael K. said on his show yesterday that he was speaking to a friend of his who also happens to be an agent for MLB players. And one of his clients, and this was not a Yankee, and it's unclear if this is a Met, but we don't know who it is. Michael K. did not disclose any names. But apparently, according to one of the players who is known around the league and is respected, there are players on his team, and I think other players who are not on his team, who are not social distancing, who are going to bars, who are not following protocol when you think about outside of the stadium. And I'm thinking to myself, is this a joke?
Must be
a joke.
Must be to them.
This is a pandemic, for God's sakes, where at least 145,000 people have sadly lost their lives. And, we're trying to have some sense of normalcy to give the fans out there something to smile about throughout this horrible event that we're still going through and won't be over for a few months. And it's as if you're thinking it's over. Newsflash, it's not over. This is not over. It just makes me mad. And I'm so upset that people think that it's okay to do this. You're a professional athlete. You're professional athletes. Set a good example. If you get sick, you're not setting that example. You're hurting yourself and your teammates.
More importantly, I agree with everything you just said, Matt, but it shows a failure on the MLB's part to hold its players accountable.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've seen this not just with COVID, but also with the cheating scandal involving the Houston Astros and some other teams that were involved and coaching staff. So the MLB not only needs to figure out how it's going to respond to this crisis, but also they need to really reevaluate and reassess how they are going to hold their players accountable for these rules and regulations in the future so that they are taken seriously and are followed.
Jackson, I just thought of this, and I want to give this question to you. Obviously, from what we know, MLB has no plans on creating some sort of bubble. In fact, in my mind, I think it's too late because you just started the season, and if you create a bubble, it's going to take time for all the teams to get there and safely. So my question to you is now a time, and this is a why or why not question, is this the right time for teams themselves to literally tell their players and staff as well, and even personnel, that if you, besides going home for the night and all that, if you go somewhere where you shouldn't, while we're still living throughout this coronavirus pandemic, then you're going to be disciplined? Do you think now is the time for teams to lay down some ground rules? Because if what this player said is true, and again, we don't know who this player is, but if what this player said is true, you're talking about a major bombshell and a very unhealthy and unethical situation.
Usually I take sometimes anonymous tips or complaints from the outside with a grain of salt, especially, if I don't have the whole picture. But it's kind of tough to do so here because of how serious this is and the ramifications and the fallout of something like this if it were true. So being the case, I think that, at least if you're not going to discipline them, at least have them keep a log or some record of some sort.
Right.
So that way, at least there's some tracing involved. The Minnesota Vikings, 3.5 hours away from me over in Minneapolis, what they're doing is in the Twin Cities Orthopedics, their training facility, they have contact tracing for anybody that gets the coronavirus. And I think that I'm not really familiar with the process and how that works, but I think that's your best bet too, because, to pinpoint where the source is,
it's like contact tracing.
I mean that's kind of how you know where it starts.
It's like contact tracing, sort of.
Yep.
Right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, it is. I will say that I think that's probably the best course of action if you're not going to discipline them. I think that you do have to kind of lay down the hammer, though.
Yeah. Sierra, I guess my last question, and this will be for you, is do you fear, and not just fear, do you also think that after what we saw this weekend and with the development that we had this past Monday, do you believe that this could actually happen again in Major League Baseball? Right now it isn't happening in the bubbles. Do you think this could happen again in Major League Baseball?
Yeah, I absolutely think it could. I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. I mean, nothing from the Phillies has been published yet, so they don't know if they have any cases.
And plus, the other thing you got to think about, and I'm sorry to interrupt, the other thing quickly you got to think about is who knows how long the Marlins aren't going to be able to play. They're not playing their opening series in Baltimore. The next 2 games they play are in Baltimore. So you just don't know if those games are going to be played.
Yeah, I don't know if they even can play at this point. I mean, with 40% of their roster that's essentially unable to play, I mean, and we don't know how sick they are either.
Right.
So if they're seriously sick, then
we know
it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, and I think it could cause the end of the MLB season prematurely.
Well, we do know the 4 players who tested positive this past Sunday were asymptomatic, so we don't know the symptoms of the other players or if they have any. We'll just find out. That's going to wrap it up on this special edition of the Weekly Pitch. Again, the breaking news: Miami Marlins COVID outbreak, 14 positive tests, 12 players, 2 coaches. As soon as we know more, we hear the Weekly Pitch. We'll have another discussion about it. For now, that's Sierra Keat. I'm Jackson Roberts. Thank you both. That's Sierra Keat. That's Jackson Roberts. There he is. And I'm Matt Price. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Weekly Pitch. So long.
Good night.